Welcome back. This is segment 2 of Citizens Forum being filmed on Tuesday, October the 13th, I hope. This segment is the Mehdi, Walt, and Jack show. We're going to be talking about the federal election. And Mehdi, I know you want to start off talking about our esteemed Prime Minister, the great statesman, the one who brings Canadians together, Stephen Harper.
There is a lot of advertising in radio and TV talking about Mr. Harper, talk about taxation. He said that he never raised taxes during his administration for last 9-10 years, and that is not true. I want to just read to you a national Winnipeg Free Post.
Winnipeg Free Press.
Free Press. Julian Beltram, Canadian Press, to December 30th, 2010, just the day before the New Year. Most Canadians to pay more taxes in 2011, but business get a break. Another headline is from National Post. Income and payroll taxes to increase across Canada, report said. And that was December 28, 2010. So they increases payroll taxes and employment insurance taxes. That's why they had $2.8 billion in employment insurance taxes that took away this year to balance their budget with, as a part of their balanced budget.
You're saying that Mr. Harper did raise taxes. Was it income taxes or just other taxes?
Payroll taxes and income tax. I mean, CCP. And also unemployment,
CPP, right.
unemployment insurance tax.
The thing is about the unemployment insurance is that's a benefit that we all pay into. It's not really a tax. That money should have been there for the workers to give them when they can't find employment. That's what that money is for.
And they've kept reducing the number of people who can actually get it.
They're making it harder and harder to get. But
the money is used now to balance their budget and say what a great government is this.
But that's really
the theft.
It's a theft.
And they always say, I mean, people like Harper are always saying that payroll taxes are the worst because they directly, make jobs more expensive. So why? I mean, to me, this is like one of the biggest questions and biggest issues of the entire election. Is why won't the other parties or the media ever call Mr. Harper on anything that he says?
And why the media spread these lies in the name of advertising, during the election, and deceiving people.
Right. So they are allowing him to kind of
to get away with it. Another issue I wanted to raise is the issue of the refugees. We find this last week that the PMO was sifting through the refugees' name in order to find the ones that most probably will vote conservative in future and have established community. So those established community also can vote for conservative because they see that the conservative government brought those refugees from those established community to Canada. This is where we came down to now. The government is, instead of having empathy with people in danger, their life is in danger, is looking for their own benefit.
Yeah.
Another issue that I thought I never saw people talk about it is the issue of these two Mexican women that were sent back. They came here as refugees. Their refugee application were denied, and they're sent back to Mexico, and both of them were murdered.
Were they designated as political refugees? Were they trying
no, they came here and said that their life is in danger because of the drug gangs, roaming into their town and city. One of them, I don't want to even talk about how she was murdered, because it was so gruesome. Suffice to say that she was pregnant, and she was murdered in the most brutal way, and the baby was cut out of her, And the other one, she was 24-year-old. The other one was Veronica Castro. She was 41-year-old, beaten to death. And nobody talk about it. They don't exist.
Why were they sent back?
This is because their application for refugees was not accepted. You know, because supposedly Mexico is a safe country, and the government of Mexico will take, you know, protect them. But this is where we came down to. You know, this is what government, when they talk about barbaric cultural practices, I say let's turn back that to Mr. Harper barbaric cultural practices, because when he doesn't have any empathy for people that their life is in danger and send them back in order to pretend that he's a tough guy and his government is stopping the flow of bogus refugees. But when they die, when they went, the reporters went to Minister of Immigration, Jason Kenney at the time, he wouldn't speak. He didn't want to talk about it. What a bunch of cowards we have. I mean, you know, last week we heard that they created a tip line. They wanted to create a tip line for barbaric cultural practices. That is stigmatizing Muslim community, you know, and creating an enemy within for the old stock Canadian, you know, the Canadian that's supposed to be the real Canadian. And I want to turn that back to Mr. Harper and his barbaric cultural practices. His government was involved. The army that they sent to Afghanistan was involved in arrest. For example, they would go sweep a whole village of the young man and the adult man. You know, anybody over 12-year-old man were arrested and sent to be tortured. And they knew about that. We know about that fact because Richard Colvin, the Canadian diplomat, testified to that fact. He didn't mind.
So I remember that story very clearly. There was an article in the Toronto Star that seriously raised the question, is Stephen Harper a war criminal under both Canadian and United Nations law, because the Canadian government ordered Canadian troops to arrest people and turn them over to the Afghan police who it was known was torturing them. That is a war crime. And I contacted a group of lawyers that were looking into this case, and they said, yes, the story is there. The media completely covered it up. And here we have an election where it's not being mentioned. I mean, maybe Mr. Harper is or is not a war criminal, but certainly an investigation has to be carried out under both Canadian and United Nations law. And the media and the other parties will not say it.
Not only that, he also used information extracted under torture. So that way he supports the practice of torture. Isn't that maybe we Canadians should call the tip line and talk about the cultural practices of Mr. Harper, and maybe
there
something,
is no tip line for
maybe
that.
something come out of that.
You wanted to talk about the NDP.
Yeah, one last thing I want to just say about these cultural practices, barbaric cultural practices, is the story of Ashley Smith, a teenager that was arrested because she threw crab apple at the postie man.
She threw an apple at
crab apple.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was
which is not a joke. I mean, that's
that was
a
the
serious
reason
thing.
for arresting her. And because she has a little bit mental illness, they put her in jail, and then they put her in solitary confinement in a straitjacket. They really treat her very, very badly. And they watch her in the cell, in the solitary confinement. She hang herself. And this is Mr. Harper, way of tough on crime administration of these fools, these criminals, that we put in as our government for last 10 years.
Especially when she's still a child.
A child.
You know.
Can you believe that? If it's happened in Timbuktu, we say they are uncivilized.
Yeah.
But here in Canada, under this regime, about NDP, I thought it's important when NDP give all these promises. As a long-time member of NDP for 24 years, I'm not anymore, I want to say, don't believe it. Look at what they have done when they come to power. For example, we all remember the NDP came to power in 1990 in British Columbia, 1991 in British Columbia, and promised tax fairness, child care program. They promised Royal Commission on Forestry. They promised protection of at least 12% representative ecosystem. They also promised to immediate ban on export of raw logs and fair pay and treatment for the workers. None of those things happen. With the workers, because they claim that they are party of the workers, with the workers, Mr. Harcourt came out and said, after a year, he said, we find out that the economic situation is much worse, so the workers should be happy to have their job. So 0.01, that means in 3 years they get 1% increase in their wages.
Which of course is a decrease because of inflation.
Yes. And so when when NDP promised things, don't believe it. It's not going to happen. It's just charade. Mr. Rankin, we see that they call him as an environmental hero. I don't know if people know about the Camano Completion Project report that he wrote, and it's completely surprising because he wrote a report about 75 pages, something like that.
What year was that, Mehdi?
To 1992 or 1993.
Okay.
And he said that we should support this project because economic benefit of a 1 billion hydroelectric project is so great that it outweighs even the worst case estimate of its negative effect. So what is the negative effect? 15% destruction of 15% of the fish in Fraser River, And how does he estimate that? He's not an economist, but he talked about the economic benefit. The economic benefit wasn't to the people of British Columbia. It was to Alcan. So he wrote a report in support of a corporation.
Just to put this in context a bit, this is when Alcan, this is in Kitimat, and they had a smelter.
They wanted to divert 87% of the flow of Nechako River for electric production.
A huge environmental
disaster.
And Mr. Rankin wrote a report.
Mr. Rankin wrote a report that the government have no choice but to follow the agreement. And they had a lots of choices because the agreement was illegal. It did not consider the right of the native people to the land. So there would have been a lots of reasons to stop it.
I remember, Mehdi, they built that plant to smelt aluminum. It wasn't to create electricity. So once they moved away from making aluminum, the deal's off.
Yes.
So they had a very good grounds not to accept that.
Exactly. Then he was also involved in core process. The government promised to have a royal commission because there was so much corruption in plundering of the forest resources of this province by multinational corporations. We wanted a royal commission with the ability to subpoena witnesses and evidence. They didn't do that. They created this swindle act, that I call it, core process, and through the core process, instead of protecting 12% representative ecosystem, they only protected about 6% of the old growth forest in Vancouver Island, and that was supposed to be a great thing. And Mr. Rankin was the main person from the government in that process, representing the government. He engaged in main person as a treaty negotiation with the Aboriginal people, supposed to bring some level of fairness, and it has been disaster. It is just a new way to swindle Aboriginal people out of their land. He also was engaged in 6 Mile Ranch. He was put by government on a retainer for $175 an hour to help them to somehow agree, to make people agree with their decision to take lots of agricultural land out of the commission against the wishes of Agricultural Land Commission. Here is the NDP government is doing that. And Mr. Rankin was work on that. But the worst thing he did, I think, was the Freedom of Information Act, so-called Freedom of Information Act and Protection of Privacy. If you remember, I was a researcher for Sierra Club as a volunteer at that time. We were both within Sierra Club in 1980 since 1989 at that time. And I could get all sorts of information easily. And that's why we went to court and stopped the logging in our watershed, because we had so much wonderful information. And when this act came in, stop the flow. In the name of freedom of information, if you remember, I call it, within 2 years, I call it, this is Freedom from Information Act. And what they did really, they laid on the infrastructure of information, the control of information. So for any simple information, you have to apply for it, and they have 30 days. The big brothers always know who is asking for what, and they always looking at the information before they release it if there is something embarrassing for the government. So this is not freedom of information.
So before the NDP brought in the Freedom of Information Act, you just went in and you got the information.
Yeah, exactly. And see, Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, the same as like a Fair Election Act. It's a newspeak, you know.
Call it the opposite of what it really is.
What is really is.
You wanted to talk a little bit about the Greens.
Yeah, the Green is, what I wanted to say about the Green is that not many people know what they are stand for. I'm not a member of the Green Party, but one thing that I really love about what they are proposing is free post-secondary education. I think for an amount of $6 billion a year, if we can have our students free education, we offer them free education, this is good for future of Canada. Why are we putting our students, our young people, into a huge amount of debt before even they went to the market, working in the society?
And that would be $6 billion a year.
About $6 billion a year.
About half of what the Royal Bank makes in profit in a year.
And also I want to say that the amount of subsidy for fossil fuel industry, direct and indirect, according to IMF, is $34 billion a year. So compare that to the $6 billion. Another thing that the Green are standing for is retrofitting homes. And if we do that, we reduce the energy used in home by about 60 to 70%. That is the amount of money the people can save every year, year after year, and reduce the global effect on global climate. And cutting the subsidies to fossil fuel, which they are saying. And also another thing that they are talking about is guarantee annual income. Guarantee annual. So you are going to get rid of poverty in a very good way, you know. And it's much more beneficial to society than any other way of getting rid of the poverty. Compare that to what, for example, some of these NDP stand. I should say, the NDP, for example, they talk for environmental protection, but they don't walk the walk. Rachel Notley just recently got elected. She put a Alberta Climatic Change Panel. There is no scientist in that. There are 4 of them related to the forest industry, and 1 of them related to the union. This is the panel, 5 people, consultant related to forest industry.
Forest or oil?
To oil industry. Yeah. And a person from union. No scientists. But if you talk to them about the pipeline, they say, science have to decide. But when we come to power, science is not going to decide. The same thing, we see, for example, Mr. Randall Garrison asking for when we asked him about the pipeline, he said, I oppose all the present proposal. So if you tweak the present proposal a little bit, when they come to power, they will agree with it. Yeah. You know, the same with about a month and a half ago, he was in CFAX, and when Ian Jessup asked him about why NDP doesn't oppose the boarding of the boat that was going to Gaza in international water by Israeli soldiers and attacking and beating up the people in the boat, he said he wouldn't condemn that.
I remember. Yeah.
You know, in the international water.
Yeah.
And Ian Jessup has to say, this is a bunch of crap, Mr. Randall Garrison. So I think we have the only choice really here in Victoria is to vote Green, go with the Green members. Let's send 4 or 5 Green candidates to the Parliament and see what's happened, because we know what the other one has done. The other one.
Thank you, Mehdi. Thank you, Walt. And thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.
I'm all.